Hey guys, the Kamsh here. As you know, Wrath of the Old Gods is pretty soon approaching, so I thought today we'd take a little bit of time to talk about some of the cards that I think could be pretty cool and spawn their own archetypes. So we're just going to go over some of the cards that have very good combo potential or just want a deck to be built around them. Some of them are obvious, some of them are a little bit less so, and we'll talk about some of the cards that combo with them, some of the competitive viability, and just some things like that to get some people's minds jogging a little bit, so you know maybe what kind of deck you want to build when the cards that come out, and you can just jump into ladder right away with something fun and instead of having to take some time to think about it or waiting to see what decks do well in tournaments, stuff like that. Always good to have something in mind to play when the new set comes out. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the cards I want to talk about. Most of these are going to be cards that, again, want their own archetype built around them, or are just generally, just generally cards that you want to build your deck specifically for those cards, not just good cards that fit into currently existing decks. So let's start about talking about Herald Volazh, or Volazh, however you want to say it. I'm sure there is a right way. Probably just can't manage it. This card's pretty cool. So it says Battle Cry, summon a 1/1 copy of each of your other minions. It's a 6-mana 5/5. 6-mana 5/5 is okay for the stats, assuming it has a relevant ability. That's what we see on things like Thorison. One other thing to mention is I'm going to be talking most about these cards in their role in standard. Standard will be the main competitive format. Lots of other cards do lots of crazy things for wild, but I'll be focusing mainly on the standard approach, which of course means that certain cards from Nax and GVG, well, all the cards from Nax and GVG will rotate out and no longer be playable in the standard format. So Herald's pretty cool. Like with a lot of these cards that we're going to be talking about, the body doesn't matter as much as the effect. So what this basically does is it makes a copy of all of your minions on the board with poor stats. They're just 1/1s. They die really easily. So an obvious way you might think to combo this is with death rattles. The only problem there is that there's not going to be that many good death rattles since things like Nerubian Egg are leaving. But this does make copies of things like Sylvanas or Cairn, or if you manage to steal a Tyrion, stuff like that, where they have very good death rattles. The only problem with that is that if you have a Sylvanas or a Cairn on the board, it doesn't die, and then you have 6 mana to cast something, you're already probably winning the game and having board control. So in that sense, it's more of a win card. Similarly with things like Malagos or Prophet Velen, where you're trying to combo them out, this requires quite a lot of Thorison ticks to do in the same turn. You know, play a Malagos, play this to copy the Malagos, or play a Velen, play this to copy the Velen, and then do the same thing. Requires a lot of additional mana. So unless you're actively thought stealing innervates or something, which you can't really rely on, this is pretty hard to make work. This does copy Thorison, but again, if you already have a Thorison out and surviving, you're probably winning. So the only problem I see with this card is that it costs a lot of mana. If they had made it maybe like a 1-mana 1/1, that'd be a cool card to build around, because it itself would have a pretty bad body. The only problem with that is that card would probably be a little bit too good, a little bit too broken. So they did make it quite expensive, which makes it hard to combo with the rest of things. I mean, it has a decent body and makes some tokens, and maybe we're thinking too broad on the build around me scale. Maybe it's just a value card, and you can copy like a Northshire Cleric, draw some extra cards. But you don't want it to go too crazy on multiple Northshire Clerics, you know? So this card, in short, it does some cool things, and it has some combos with death rattles and stuff like Malagos, but it is a little bit hard to pull off, a little bit expensive. So might not see too much constructed play, but definitely a sweet card, and one worth thinking about building around. And as future sets come in, there might be more stuff that you want to copy, more cheap death rattles, so that's something definitely to think about. Moving on, we have N'Zoth the Corruptor. So this card again works with death rattles. It's pretty sweet. All of the old gods can be built around, which is pretty cool. It's 10 mana 5/7, so it doesn't die to BGH, although we still don't know if BGH will be nerfed or not. And again, the body doesn't matter as much as the rest of the stuff. So Battle Cry, summon your death rattle minions that died this game. So this card's pretty sweet, because you don't have to have a board or anything for it to work. You just have to have, again, the main ones are going to be like Sylvanas, Cairn, or Tyrion. Have any of those die. Anubarak in Rogue. You can also copy stuff with Raptor in Rogue, and should bring back the Raptors as well. Because actually, I don't know if it brings back Raptors, because the Raptors will copy a Death Rattle, but the Raptors themselves don't have Death Rattle. Probably doesn't bring back Raptors, but it goes in the same deck as Raptors, because you're copying Death Rattles, which is really sweet. So basically, this card, you play a mid-rangey deck with again the Care and Sylvanas, stuff like that. And you play this, and it brings them back. So it's sort of like a value anyfin. It's not like an anyfin that's killing them, but it just builds you a really strong board. And it's naturally strong against things like Brawl and Twisting Nether, because it only brings back things with Death Rattle. And it's also nice that this one doesn't die to BGH, because the way you're winning with this card is you're building a board, so the body kind of does matter a little bit. So you get a 5/7, and if you get any of Sylvanas Karn or Tyrion or like a Nubrak or other Death Rattle, Malorn, if you're playing this in Druid, all of those cards like this plus that are worth 10 mana, so you're getting pretty good value on this card. So this is a card to consider. This is less of a build around me than the other ones, but it's pretty strong in a mid-range deck, and you're just putting this card in, grabbing some sweet Death Rattles. Pretty cool card. Definitely could go in a Death Rattle themed deck, or you could just stick it in, to like a mid-range / control paladin that plays Sylvanas and Tyrion, and you're getting some value. This card's pretty good. Probably will see constructed play. It's a little bit slow, but the meta's looking like it'll be pretty slow. So I like this card. Moving on, we have Yasharj. So this card is probably the worst of the old gods in my opinion, because it's very bad against mass removal like Brawl and stuff, and it's also expensive and has a more random effect than you don't bring back all your Death Rattles. So this does kind of the same thing as the previous old god, where it builds a board. So you presumably play Druid and you ramp into this. I don't know if this will see play in like a deck that has to cast it on curve on just turn 10 without Wild Growths or Innervates. Maybe like some type of a Reno or a Handlock, but that doesn't seem that good because you can pull Jiraxis or Reno, or like if you're pulling Giants, that's cool, but in that, probably a ramp Druid type deck. But Druid relies a lot on choose ones, and this just pulls them, so you don't even get the Battle Cry. But if in theory you were building a deck with this, you could play like maybe Astral Communion Druid, something like that. This goes very well in that deck. But basically, you just want to ramp into this heavily, and then have your deck built in such a way that it usually pulls things like Ysera. It is really bad against mass removal, so again, the Astral idea looks pretty good, where you Astral Communion into this, and then the opponent can't Brawl or Twist the other in time to deal with your stuff. This is a pretty good card to put in that deck. It isn't necessarily too much better than just like playing a Ysera, but the fact that it itself is a 10/10 and it pulls something is pretty nice. If we see a nerf to BGH, this could be pretty strong, but again, just builds the board, gets a lot of on-board value, and you probably want to play it in a heavy ramp deck with a lot of big things, because you want to construct your deck in such a way that this doesn't pull like a Mana Orb or something. Alright, moving on. Renounce Darkness. This card is pretty cool. Yes, it's probably bad and it's random, but there's some things to take a look at here. So first of all, this only replaces your hero power and your warlock card, so your neutral minions stay the same. So basically what this does is it changes all the spells and class minions you're playing and your hero... so let's ignore the hero power for now. So it changes all the class minions and the spells you're playing into random cards of another class, but basically you get them all Thorisent, because they all cost one less, which is a pretty cool advantage. And all your neutral minions stay the same, so you could build just a Warlock deck, play some just normal neutral minions that something would play. To use an example, Shredder, although Shredder will be rotating and not playable in Standard, something like that, a really good like 4-drop, really good 5, so on and so forth. And then you play this, and basically you win because all your spells are cheaper to cast. The only problem with that is that you lose out on your hero power, and Warlock arguably has one of the best hero powers since it lets you tap, and you get a random one. And the other bad thing is the class cards you get are random, so they could be really bad. But you do get that 1 mana advantage. So this card is probably bad, but if you built a deck just relying on getting this card, just play a mid-range deck with like removal and some good neutral minions, this could save you from situations where you potentially would have no other options, which is an argument for it being just a 1 of in Reno lock. And the other thing is that the 1 mana less, that's a pretty powerful effect, everything costing 1 mana less. That's a lot better than just 1 Thorisent activation on your hand, because it's your whole deck, so as you draw things, it will actively be cheaper. So I don't know, interesting card, definitely worth considering. It'll probably end up being bad, but it's something I could definitely see cards like this being something that people want to build decks around. So moving on, we have Infest. So this card's pretty sweet. Basically, the goal here is to build a mid-range or control hunter deck. That's what Blizzard has been giving us a lot of cards to do. There's another one, the 8-mana card, that gives you all 3 animal companions, and Hunter already has access to things like Savannah Highmane, which is one of the most powerful 6-drop minions in the game for a mid-range or control deck. And this basically reads 3 mana, draw a beast for every minion on the board, things like that. So this is basically kind of like an Arcane Intellect, except it has potential to be both better and worse, and the cards it draws you are slightly worse than the average card in your deck because they're random beasts. But the cool thing about this card is that it gives you access to a lot of beasts, which you normally wouldn't have otherwise, and it lets you draw a lot of cards in a class that can potentially not draw as many cards. So some combos with this are like Unleash Infest, lets you draw a lot of cards, assuming they have a board, because you're just going to trade off all your hounds, and each hound gives you a minion. It's kind of like comboing Unleash with Cult Master or Buzzard, except this costs 3, so it's closer to the original Buzzard Unleash combo, which costs 5, this costs 6 total, to draw you a lot of cards, because Cult Master Unleash is kind of on the expensive side. And you can also afford to like do this Juggler and Unleash for only 8 mana. 8 mana is a very feasible amount, and you kind of just get to go off, so it's pretty sweet. Basically, a pretty cool card, might enable Hunter to do more late game things, which is pretty cool. We've already seen a lot of people playing Cult Master and Hunter just for that value, and this is sort of a pseudo replacement effect. Gets a lot of value. Yeah, and moving on, we have Cthun. So Cthun is a really awesome card. I really like it. Basically, when it enters, it deals damage equal to its attack randomly split among all enemies. So it's an Avenging Wrath type effect. But there's a lot of different cards that buff it. Basically, you can play, you know, like a 2-mana 2/2 that gives Cthun +2/+2 wherever it is, so in your deck, and so on and so forth. So immediately we think of Bran. Bran is friends with a lot of the old gods, like the Death Rattle one, and the one we'll be talking about later. Basically doubles the effect of a lot of the old gods, and it doubles the effect with Cthun. It also doubles the effect of all the cultists you're playing that are buffing Cthun. So it's pretty feasible to get your Cthun fairly big. You know, like 2020 just from playing cards on curve is not just a dream. And depending on how behind on board you are, 20 random damage plus a 20/20 if they don't have a removal for it. If they don't have a removal for it, they probably just lose a lot of time. But 20 random damage, even assuming they have like a BJH in hand, can likely clear the board or kill them. And that's just the start of it. So you can play this in like a rogue shell, and then you can shadow step this to replay it. You can also shadow step the Bran, which is so shadow stepping this isn't as good because it, you know, costs a lot of mana, stuff like that. But if you shadow step the Bran, what you can do is you can play Bran and Cthun in the same turn with a 1 Thaurissan tick and having Shadow Step the Bran, and then it doubles the whatever stats the Cthun is at, which is presumably a decent amount because you had Bran out with the cultists. So basically, let's say that 20 or let's be conservative, let's say 15. That 15 becomes 30. 30 random damage is a lot. So with Thaurissan, Bran, Shadow Step, those kind of shenanigans, you can play like Vanish, Sap. You basically play a control rogue type deck. A little bit like Mill Rogue, except instead of milling them cards, you Cthulhu them and they lose. So that's a pretty sweet shell. You can also play this in Warlock, where you get to tap a lot, play all the cultists. You can play it in Reno, where you play one of all the cultists above Cthulhu. You have a Reno, too, to heal yourself, and it's sort of a late-game finisher like Draxus that you don't have to invest as much into, because Draxus is a pretty big tempo loss. And then you have like a Druid shell where you just play good mid-range cards and you ramp into Cthulhu and win that way. So Cthulhu can go in a lot of archetypes, inspires a lot of decks built around it, but I'm sure we'll be seeing Shulden videos where it hits people for quite a lot, because it's a card with a lot of potential, and there's no way for your opponents to really interact with it. They can't, other than like randomly milling you cards, which isn't guaranteed to pull the Cthulhu, they can't really stop it from dealing its damage. So that's why it's really powerful, is it's a win condition that the opponent can't interact with. Like, it's kind of like in Freeze Mage, where the opponent can't interact with Burn, except they can steal your Ice Block, they can play, or they could play Loatheb. Now we'll see what answers there is to that. But your opponent can't really interact with this, other than like Mana Wraith preventing you from casting it. So a lot of crazy stuff this card can do, and mainly it's important because it's a win condition they can't interact with, so really powerful in that sense, and I'll be excited to see what a Cthulhu can do. And finally, we'll be talking about Yoggsaron Hope's End. So this card is really, really cool. So it's a 7/5 for 10, which are bad stats, but it doesn't matter at all. This card's stats really don't matter. It could be a 1/1, and I'd be fine with that. I think it would only change, like, if the card was like a 5, being a 1/1 instead of a 7/5 would make it like a 4.9. And we'll talk about why the stats matter so little in a little bit, but basically its stats don't matter. Blizzard just assigned arbitrary numbers to it. So as Battlecry, cast a random spell. For each spell you've cast this game, target's chosen randomly. So the awesome thing about this card is it's, assuming you're playing a deck with a lot of spells, which you are because you're playing Yoggsaron, basically what this does is coin flip, you win the game. So coin flip, heads you win the game, tails you lose the game. Because it casts a bunch of spells randomly. A lot of them tend to be beneficial to use, so the coin is slightly unfair. Like, usually you'll get a slight advantage with Yoggsaron over who's taking the most Pyroblast to face, stuff like that. Because, like, Lightning Storm, Flame Strike, those kinds of things are beneficial to you, because there's some spells that don't target. But basically, why that effect is so powerful is because if you're behind, which you will be because you're playing a bunch of spells with Yoggsaron, flipping a coin to win the game is a really powerful effect. It might look like it's 50-50 on either side, but if there was a like 1 mana card that said coin flip, you win or you lose the game, everybody would play 2 in their deck, because the minute you're behind or like your opponent has lethal on board, you can't do anything about it, you just coin flip, and that took your chances of winning from 0% to 50%, or like 10% to 50%, and that's a very good increase. This is again a card they can't interact with because you just cast it on 10. Like, what can they do about all the random spells? Nothing. So you basically you can play this in any kind of shell. You can play this in a mage shell. Mage has a lot of good spells. You can play like Flame Strikes, Blizzards, Frost Nova, Doomsayer, stuff like that. Play a lot of spells that way. You can play this in a rogue shell with like Vanish and Sap, stuff like that. You can even play this in Druid with like Innervate, Wild Growth, and Nourish, but it seems a little bit worse than Major Rogue, because Major Rogue have the most spells. You can play this in Priest with like Akanai Circle and a bunch of board clears. Basically, you play this in a deck with a lot of spells and board clears. You cast it on 10. It's slightly more likely to win you the game than to lose you the game, assuming the boards are about even, which they should be because you're board clearing. So, maybe not the most competitively played card, we'll see. But this card has the most potential, I think, just because of how swingy the effect is. Like, this is as close to coin flip, heads you win, tails you lose, they're going to print, I think. And it's incredibly powerful. Very strong effect. You build around it. There's actually a yoggsaron calculator or something like that. I recommend checking that out. That gives you like a sample list of 10 spells, but it'll be like a couple of draw spells, or randomly targeted heal, a couple of randomly targeted burn spells, and a board wipe or something like that. That's fine. Or if you've cast like 20 or 30 spells, something crazy like that, then it'll kind of go off. There's a lot of cards that have actually given you to enable casting even more spells, like the Tome that puts 3 random spells in your hand, stuff like that. So, basically, this card does a lot of random stuff to the board, and it gives you a chance to win when you're behind, which I think is really important. Unfortunately, you can't just place this in a random deck, like a mid-range deck, because it won't do as much, so you have to build this in a deck full of spells where you usually will be behind. So, I don't know how constructed playable it'll be, but it's a really awesome card. I'm really excited to play with it. So that was my review of a couple of the Build Around Me cards in this set that I just wanted to touch on really briefly. Some of the more fun cards as Build Around Me's tend to be. So we'll see how those work out. I'll definitely be playing decks with a lot of those cards and uploading them here, so definitely check some of those out. But that's kind of my starting point on cards I'm considering building decks around or playing with in the new set, other than just like the good mid-range cards that'll fit into currently existing decks, which I'm sure you've heard about in many card reviews. So that was kind of my thoughts on those cards. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoyed some of the content, please check out some other Tempest Storm videos and articles. And if you enjoyed my content, you can check me out at twitch.tv/thekamshhs. Check out some of my other videos or stuff like that. Feel free to ask any questions, anything like that, in the comments, whether on YouTube or Tempest Storm. And as always, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next.